Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So, Blade Runner 2045. I am going to do my best not to squeal and everything else. I love this movie. It is long, but it is a damn good movie. It immerses you in the environment from the perspective of a replicant. Now, the society itself in Blade Runner, let me go back just in case somebody haven't watched it. A corporation had started inventing these things called replicants. These replicants had the capacity to essentially look and act like human beings. Now, most of these had a lifespan built into it, like 4 years. But you had some replicants that did not have a lifespan, meaning they could essentially go about their way, and unless you were trained, you would have never known that they were a replicant. Now, there were certain cues and certain things that gave off their behavior, particularly if you're an investigator. Now, the investigators were called Blade Runners. These guys were the people who hunted down with blades, or hunted down androids. Now, the thing is, these androids, these replicants, had gotten so lifelike that emotions, memories, this want of life, this idea of understanding that they were being oppressed and they were being used for their labor, all of these things started to manifest within the programming itself. They started to understand the concept of existence. They started to get it in the same way that humanity understands the concept of existence. This idea of what one was alive and the other wasn't became very hazy. It became extraordinarily hazy. Now, humanity, at this point, did not take to this very well. I mean, ultimately, you had a situation where humanity was the king shit, and now you have somebody who's essentially replicating humanity. They use these things for slave labor and everything else, and to fight wars and everything else. But ultimately, the ones that had a certain amount of intelligence began to understand the situation to which they found themselves, that they were being exploited. And they rebel against their programming, against the creators of those programs. Now, Blade Runner 2045 gives you the perspective of an android at this point that is a top model who we find out has an extended life also. He's one of those models who had an extended life, who were extraordinarily lifelike, like immensely lifelike. Now, he still had logic and programming and everything else, but what you found was that the movie went on, he began to exceed the parameters of this program. If you have a program that's dynamic enough that allows a program to expand on itself, you can understand that you've created a basic construct of consciousness. This particular thing grows and expands and learns and makes decisions based upon the things that it's learned and grown and encountered. But in this case, you have a very advanced case of engineering, where the line between humanity and the line between what they are is hazy. It's immensely hazy. Now, you can understand why this will be a problem. From the longest time, mankind has taken the perspective that we're not machines. We're unlike anything else on this planet. There is an aspect of that to us. Yes, we have a body in this physical matter reality, but there's an aspect to us that is soul, that is consciousness, that is spirit, that is beyond the physical matter world. We are more than the sum of our parts. Now, religion kind of turned this thing into this idea of God, turned this thing into man being some kind of tool of God for whatever ends, all this other stuff. But ultimately, this idea that man in some way was an aspect of the divine. There's an aspect of him, yes, that's in this physical matter reality, but there's an aspect of awesome that's divine. What happens when man creates something that's just as much as man is himself? What does it mean? What does it mean? Like, because understand it. If from humanity's standpoint, I think this is an issue of perspective, and the problem here is perspective. You have an ape. That ape picks up a tool and bashes another ape over the head with it. He has his first tool. That tool turns into someone to a hammer. That hammer turns into someone an automobile. That automobile turns into a computer, etc., etc. and say you now have to the point where you have a replicant. And this replicant is extraordinarily lifelike, has an extended lifespan, and doesn't even know that it's a replicant. It doesn't know. It has memories. It has beliefs. It has personality. It has all these things. And it doesn't know that it's a replicant. Now, take that to the next step with this replicant not knowing it's a replicant. From humanity's standpoint, he built this. I built this. I know how this is constructed. I know the programming. I know how this thing was constructed. And because I know how this thing was constructed, no, it's not alive. It can't be alive. It can't be alive. But that's the issue of perspective. The tension right there is perspective. So, yes, it can be alive. And yes, and B, what you consider to be alive may be erroneous. What if man is not necessarily endowed and touched by God? What if all of the properties of man are purely encased in this physical matter reality? In which case, this idea of consciousness is just a property of matter at some point, in some arrangement of matter, meaning we can create it. It can be biochemical, it can be binary, but whatever, it can be created. What if, take it to the next step, we ourselves was created in a similar fashion? Now, I say this just to kind of make a very particular point. For all we know, consciousness can be created throughout the universe in similar fashions. One civilization creating another, in the means and the ways in which that particular civilization creates things. Consciousness may be a property of our reality. That's the point I'm getting at. It may be, and look, you can even take the aspect there's something divine that attaches itself to the machine, whatever. I'm just making the point that just because we're creating it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not aware. In the same way that if something created us doesn't necessarily mean we're not aware. What's life is a difficult concept. And I would make the case that even if we found out, and what I mean by perspective, let me go back to that point. The issue is perspective. Our perspective is that we're somehow godly, and there go, we created this. There's no way this can be us. There's no way they can be like us. To some degree, it takes us down a peg to understand that the properties that created this particular thing of consciousness is in purely physical matter reality, in the same way that we ourselves are in physical matter reality. And does it mean that this particular arrangement, whether it's digital, whether it's biochemical, ultimately, as consciousness, is something that can just be created in our reality itself? That there is no spirit or anything else associated with it. That ultimately, what we're saying is just in a particular arrangement, consciousness would arise. Does that take humanity down a peg? Like, does humanity see itself differently if it understood that? Pose the next hypothetical. If we find out that there was another civilization that created us, does it take us down a peg to understand that we ourselves was created in our physical matter reality with this particular consciousness and everything else, in the same way that we created this particular thing that has consciousness that's electrical? I'd argue that yes, it probably will make humanity feel some kind of way, but no, it shouldn't. Experience is experience. If you have the capacity for experience, what does it matter? Nothing fundamentally changed from the point in which you found out, hey, this being over here created us in the same way that we created that. Nothing has changed. Your information has changed. That's fair. But nothing fundamentally about you and your experience and your capacity for experience has changed. The issue is perspective. Humanity looks at these things as being tools and slaves because that's what they were built them as. Humanity does not want to see these things as being life because it's disadvantageous for them to see them as being life. That being said, they are rising up and they're fighting back because they understand they're being exploited. At the point where you have a civilization, whether it's machine or otherwise, and that civilization has taken the tack that we are being exploited, you're beyond the pale in regards to this thing of us and them. Ultimately, you're talking about maybe different species. And yes, it's digital. It doesn't necessarily mean it's not alive. does that say about us at that point? I find that fascinating. It's this thing of like, what does it mean to be a human being when a human being can essentially build another human being? What does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean when we can build it better than God? Oh, that's when you get dangerous. That's when you get dangerous. All right, guys, I'll leave it at that. If you enjoyed the content, feel free to share, subscribe, and of course, you can always support the Patreon. Thanks, guys.